All right, what is up, everyone? We are here for a video reviewing the Indianapolis regional results. I've been trying to be consistent about uploading to YouTube, so we're here. We're going to be going over results. I actually just got back from Indianapolis today, so very fresh and recent. So yeah, overall, this event obviously had a very surprise winner. I don't think people expected Miraidon to win. A lot of people were saying that Miraidon wasn't the strongest restricted out there, and then it ends up kind of just coming out of nowhere and like absolutely obliterating the competition. I wouldn't say out of nowhere because it was actually pretty solid before. Like there were teams that were doing well in limitless tournaments, but it definitely wasn't a team that people had their eyes on. So it was definitely like kind of a surprise, I think, that it won, especially the version of the team. Like I think the core of Miraidon, Ensign for a draft and Ursaluna is really good, and then also having the Tailwind option on it is really good. So it's definitely something like I'm not very surprised like it did well. And then we saw a couple different variations of teams across the board. Incineroar made up majority of the teams, but interesting enough, if they didn't have Incineroar as a fire type, the fire type was Chi-Yu, with the only exception being the seventh place team, Keanu Inosanto's team. Um, that team, interesting enough, did not have a fire type, but also there was a Pelipper, so that kind of makes sense. But yeah, so what I'm going to be doing is breaking down the individual teams, kind of giving you all my thoughts on it, and then we're going to go through maybe some trends and like meta trends to keep in mind for like future tournaments, right? So first off, Rajan Ball's team, he's been around for a while, he's been playing and competing, so he finally got the win he's wanted. Um, Life Orb Ursaluna and Specs Miraidon Terra Electric. This set was terrifying all throughout the run. The fact that he could just Terra Electric Discharge in front of so many things was like actually insane, and the damage output it was doing was crazy. It was definitely something you had to respect. Also, one thing to really note about this team that I thought was really cool was the fact that it had like double sash basically, because you had Ogrepon, Cornerstone, and Whimsicott. And like kind of that double sash pressure is like really nice, especially next to like a big attacker like Miraidon. Helps you kind of stick around to be more annoying, and then you have a really bulky Incineroar with AV, and a really bulky for draft with Electric Seed as well too. The Terra Ground Helping Hand with like Miraidon's pretty funny because you can just Terra Ground Helping Hand spam next to Miraidon, of course. Miraidon's also really like deceptively bulky as well. Because you'd think like because it's so offensive, like there's no way it could be bulky, and then like you see it take an attack and it like literally lives everything. It's kind of insane. I'm not too sure if Ursaluna came up big for Rajan. I never really saw it on stream, but I'm sure it probably had some impact in some of his games. Overall, it definitely seems like the main core of the team, though, was the Miraidon, Cornerstone, Whimsicott, and Ensign, as that came to a majority of Rajan's games on stream. And then sometimes the Giraffe came. So the Giraffe is a bit of a crazy set. Terra Blast Ground with Foul Play. That's definitely something a bit unique that we haven't seen before. That being said, though, Miraidon's really cool. I think it's really solid restricted. I definitely think it has a lot of room to expand from here. So second place, Andrew Zhang's team. So Andrew Zhang's team had a couple of interesting choices on it, but I'd say it's probably a bit more standard for the norm of what we'd expect. Booster Speed, Flutter, Shadow Ball, Icy Wind, all that stuff. This was a really cool set. It was Surging Strike's Close Combat Sword Dance on Shifu with safety goggles, so it could get around like kind of the Instant Amoonguss teams. That's actually a pretty cool development, I'd say, especially because obviously you can SD in front of like Amoonguss, Instant Kali Ice, and just kind of tear them apart. Psychic Chi-Yu, I actually talked to Andrew about this. He was in my Twitch chat, and I was like, what was Psychic for? He was like, honestly, it was cope against Scarf or Shifu. So I don't know how good it was for him, but like obviously like he went far with the team, so I'm assuming it has to be kind of solid, right? Tropicos Hyper Beam came out big for him in top 4, and then also Starstorm was pretty good. I didn't see him use Dark Pulse once, so I don't know how impactful that move is, but having another coverage move if you're already running Hyper Beam probably isn't a bad idea. Amoonguss, Rocky Helmet, Terra Water makes sense. Obviously gives you a lot of control over the game. And then Tornadus, Terra Dark, Bleakwind, Tailwind, Taunt, Rain Dance, right? So overall, pretty strong team. Has like Tornursh, it has Flutter Chi-Yu, which is obviously, kind of a big core, and then Terapagos and Moongus. So there was just a lot of good synergy on this team. It was a very good offensive team, so definitely something you could expect to see around. Then we have Burns and Leonard, both using Kali Ice teams. I'd say Burns is probably the more traditional standard Kali Ice team people like saw going into this tournament. It had a couple of good placements. Also interesting enough, it was Fairy Amoonguss, which is kind of cool, I guess. And also to Sash Pelly, Grass Ice. Like, these are common things that you kind of see around, so this isn't really a surprising development. Definitely a really strong team. Definitely something you could probably expect to see around, even going into Stockholm this weekend. Then we have Leonard's team. So Leonard's is slightly different. It's actually a Terra Dragon for a draft, which I thought was really interesting. That's definitely a unique typing for it. As well too, it's Sash Amoongus, which is also a really different set than the norm. And then besides that, most of the other sets are pretty standard. 3 electric attacks, Raging Bolt isn't the most common, but it kind of makes sense on the team. And then also Citrus Max Speed Ensign. There are definitely a couple of like interesting choices as well, like the Glacier, or not the Glacier, the Calyrex ended up being close combat and also ended up having Terra Fire, which is different. So there were a lot of like interesting decisions, but I think a lot of them were justified. So for example, like the fur drafting Uproar for the Kali Ice running Terra Fire, and then you have the Urshifu opting to run Terra Water instead of Ghost because you have a fur draft, and then Sasha Mungus. I'm kind of interested by that actually. I'm not 100% sure what it's for. I guess it gives you guaranteed redirection next to fur draft, which is kind of cool. So one thing to note. All right. And then the top 8 teams I want to talk about. So for top 8, we had Nails with this like a very similar team to what Andrew Zhang had, except that it was Raging Bolt with AV. It was also Terra Grass, so a pretty good defensive type for it, I suppose. It had a Sash Chiyu instead, and it just had a more normal Urshifu, except that it was Taunt Shifu. And then there was also a Rocky Helmet of Mungus, as we've seen around, and then Pagos and Tornadus. So overall, pretty standard. Nothing too shocking, I'd say, team-wise. But pretty solid all around. Also, no Hyper Beam on the Pagos, unlike Andrew Zhang's. So then we have Shiliang Tang's team. So his team was using the AV Ogre stuff. AV Ogre Serena, Scarf Shifu, and Iron Jugulus. I think honestly, restricted formats really lean well into letting these kind of like weirder picks thrive, just because of like the nature of like having really well supported like restricteds with like kind of some janky mons can be really like successful in these formats. So definitely something that like you can expect to see in a lot of teams. Even the Zamazenta team, which I'll get to. Jugulus actually seemed pretty good for Shiliang in his run. Hurricane's actually an incredibly strong damage option. It can put a lot of pressure against Mons, so it's definitely a really cool option. And then as well too, interesting note on the Serena. The Serena opts to drop its 4th move for Protect. That's actually not something Serena's run super often, but I think it's pretty strong, right? So definitely cool. Definitely something you expect to see around, right? But yeah. Okay. And then we have Keanu Inosanto's team. He's pretty young actually. I heard he like in the chat someone mentioned he was like 17, coming up and coming local. So great performance for him. Interesting enough, this Zamazenta does not have Iron Defense, so just straight up focus on getting that body press damage. We've actually seen that set pretty commonly, like just kind of focusing on body press damage, not really focusing on the setup, which kind of makes sense. Zamazenta, Moltres, Chen Pao, and Rillaboom seem like a really strong core that's been successful, so I'm not surprised to see those two. Latios is definitely a surprise, not exactly something I expected, but it seems strong in a balance team, so that makes sense. And then you have the Pelipper with Rocky, with Weatherball Hurricane, right, which can put a lot of pressure on versus a bunch of teams. I also think the Black Glasses Moltres Galar is really interesting because obviously you're getting really strong foul plays. If you foul play into Kali Ice, switch in Chin Pao. Excuse me. You switch in Chin Pao, you just straight up knock out Kali Ice. So a lot of really cool options there. Banrilla obviously not super common as well, but it's something. It's pretty strong damage output from what I understood, especially when you switch into Chin Pao. And then we finally have Aaron Trailer. So Aaron Trailer was using a very similar version of the team to Rajan, except that Trailer had Ditto over Ogre Pond Cornerstone. Ditto seemed to come up really big for Trailer, honestly, so I'm not surprised to see it like also perform well. I think in a single restricted format, being able to take another restricted and like actually use it against the opponent's like a pretty significant thing, especially because there's like cute interactions. Like I was talking to Trailer, like it was like he switched in his Ditto to copy a Zamazenta and he got an extra defense boost because the ability procced. And then he was able to deal a stronger body press than the opponent. So like there's some cool things you can do with Ditto, right? Like even stealing Cali boost, getting scarf pressure, like there's a lot of nice things it does. So I think it's a pretty cool mon and it really has a lot of like flexibility in terms of what it can accomplish. All right, so now going into, I'm not going to like go too far down, but I did want to highlight like some other trends. So there notably was not any Koraidons or Calyrex Shadows in the top 8, which is kind of crazy. There actually wasn't any Cali Shadows in the top 16 either, to my understanding. The highest place in Cali Shadow was actually 24th place, and it was the balance 6 that I had made. The exact sets and everything, so it's, strong. I think the six I made was really strong. I ended up losing to the mirror in one of my matches, losing to another Cali Ice team, and then pulling a really bad matchup. So, to be honest with you, I think besides those like losses, I think the team had a lot of potential, and like it definitely was carried far by Carry, right? And then the next placing Cali Shadow was a Tornadus version, Wolf's version of the team. Um, that was around. I don't believe there were too many differences besides the fact it was Psychic over Psyshock. Or maybe Wolf did have Psychic actually. Close Combat and Instant is definitely a choice as well. And then you have Scarf Shifu and pretty much the standard stuff that Wolf had on his 6. Continuing to scroll down, I don't think there's too many other Cali Shadows. There's Dylan Salvanera also using my version of the team as well. So yeah, that version was definitely strong, right? It was definitely a good team. There's actually another one here as well. So like yeah, the team was definitely really popular, right? Like I think I definitely popularized it a lot to where like a lot of people were looking into it and using it, and I think it definitely had like some really solid performances, right? Like it didn't go all the way, but I definitely think CSR is still like a really strong mon. As well too, I did want to highlight a few other like teams I thought were interesting. Groudon actually had a pretty decent performance. It got like decently far. It ended up making the top 16. We also had a bunch of Cali Ice in top 16 as well. It seems like Cali Ice by far has like the most share of Mons, with Kyogre also having a pretty good success rate. Um, there was a team I wanted to address as well. Oh yeah. Luca's Koraidon team. He was the only really high placing Koraidon. I think the next best Koraidon is like really low. Yeah, it's 41st place. So Koraidon did not really have a huge share of the day two, like maybe was anticipated. In fact, Miraidon was actually a better mon in day two than Koraidon was, and like in previous Limitless tours, the statistics were kind of showing otherwise. Luca ended up using like something that fits him very well. Like it's just Koraidon, Flutter, Chenpao, Ogerpon, Instant. Like this is something that I could have seen him running in Regulation F minus the Koraidon. And then Raging Bolt. So I think overall, like the team's really solid. There's a lot of good tools here. Ogerpon Wellspring with Koraidon's really interesting because you're actually turning off. You're weakening your own water moves, but I think there's definitely a lot of like benefits to that as well. So it kind of makes sense. Um, yeah, I mean, besides that, continuing to go down, there isn't too many other restrictors I really want to touch on. I feel like all the main restrictors that are good, you kind of see. Again, another Kali Shadow Balance team. You see a Tailwind version of Kali Shadow, and then yeah, as we continue down, it's kind of the same stuff over and over again. So where did I finish? Just to quickly go over that, because I guess it's worth noting. I ended up finishing 87. No, I finished 90th place. I brought the Bolt Balance team again. Like my losses were very. I feel like honestly, like the team was solid. It was not a team issue. I think I wasn't really on point for the first two losses. And then the mirror, honestly, like when you get poisons first, or like there's plays that you see that your opponent doesn't identify, can definitely like swing the match. And like there was just a couple of extra like overreads I made. It's definitely still my fault, right? And then the last loss I had, it was just versus a really bad matchup like Tinglu Dozo stuff, and then versus that team, like I just got like double E-Web crit both times. So definitely a lot of lessons learned. Like I definitely think I could have played better as well, but I also felt like the team was very strong. So I think it's definitely something that could have seen a lot more success too in the tournament that kind of underperformed a little bit. Now, beside my bias aside, right, obviously because I think the team I built would probably do better. There was a lot of teams that I thought were really interesting meta trends. I think Zamazenta is something that we'll continue to see creep up. I just think it's a really good Pokemon. I mean, there weren't too many, but like there were some interesting builds. Like for example, this build of Zamazenta, very different than like the normal Zamazenta teams, but has a lot of annoying tools. So like this one was a Stall Ting-Lu team with Zamazenta, Grimmsnarl, Ensign, Cress. Definitely something that we're not too used to seeing, but it definitely like seems like it could be pretty annoying to play versus. These kind of teams usually function really well, especially in NA, because in NA the meta is a little bit more random, and something like this can be like a really big matchup check for people who aren't ready. So it's kind of a cool team actually. I think this team actually had a lot of cool tools on it. As well too, a lot of the Jugulus teams ended up doing well as well. We had Andrew Ding, Justin Tang, and Chiliang using it. So, a couple of them kind of powering through. And then, yeah, we end up getting into 22. I just wanted to highlight this last team. Groudon with another placement, and ended up being with a really interesting Gouging Fire set. It's Snarl, Breaking Swipe, Flare Blitz, Howl. So there's no... so what's really interesting about it basically is that can't fake it out, right? There's no burning bulwark on it. The Groudon's 3 attacks Thunder Punch. The Raging Bolt is just fully offensive safety goggles. There's Rillaboom, Urshifu, Dark, and Flutter. So very offensive team. So I thought that was like a really interesting team to keep an eye on. Besides that, I mean, there's also Pago stuff. LA Pichatelli running Terapagos, AV Bolt. And then, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think in terms of trends, one thing to note is that the most common Pokemon in day 2, let's pull it up. I think for restricted wise, I think Cali Ice had the best performance, if I'm not mistaken. It was 21 of the teams, which is kind of insane. Like, it was, and it had like a really, really high share, right? Like, a ton of them did really well. And then also worth noting that besides Cali Ice, Cali Shadow did not have as good of a share, which is very different than the usual tournaments. Usually has like a lot of plays. It just kind of didn't perform as well as you would have thought. Like top 32 was its highest placement. Miraidon, again, as we mentioned, top 16. Luca Treasure being the highest one. Groudon actually kind of overperforming for what you would have expected. Like both of them performed pretty well considering they were the only two making a cut. Kyurem White. So Kyurem White ended up making top 32 as well. So like that's kind of what I mean. Like a lot of the restricteds that haven't been explored probably have a lot of potential, and you'll probably see a bit more of them being explored. It also is worth noting. I think this is a really funny statistic that just like some of the weirdo mons that like had very few plays ended up like actually performing pretty well. Like for example, Jugulus, right? Like top 32, top 32, top 8, right? Like I don't know. It's just really funny when like all the weird Pokemon and restricteds always do well. So that's just like a funny trend to note. I feel like things enable it. Also, like I was severely overstating how many Miraidons there were in day 2. It just happens to be that there's like a couple more Miraidon than Koraidon, it seems like. But Miraidon really performed well this tournament, so definitely something you have to keep an eye out for. But I definitely think what this tells you is that like Miraidon works well with partners that are just good Pokemon because it's already so independently strong with its electric terrain. It doesn't need like Quark Drive spammers next to it, basically. But yeah, so that's pretty much my thoughts on the event. I hope you guys enjoyed this little recap. Let me know what you think, down below as well. Let me know if you think I missed anything or if there are any teams that you thought were particularly cool. I just kind of wanted to highlight the ones I thought were particularly interesting and impactful in the metagame. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for all the support on the videos. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take it easy. Peace.